Hi, it's Kevin Lobates here, and today's video is for the Tampere University Emerging Technologies Group. And the topic of the day is micro-credentials. Now, of course, as is always the case when you have a technical topic, there's a whole bunch of background information that you need to get your head around first. So this one's not going to be a 3-minute video, it's a bit longer. And I think to start looking at the topic of micro-credentials, you need to look at the bigger topic of identity. And identity is a difficult topic. It's been the subject of discussion amongst philosophers for thousands of years. All you have to do is go and look up the ship of Theseus, or the aphorism about the fact that you can't step into the same stream twice. Even though it's the same stream on the map, the fact is that it changes from minute to minute. So as I said, philosophers have tried for a long time to deal with the concept of what identity actually is. However, if you're an engineer, you just take a practical approach, which is, how do we deal with it in everyday terms, and we stop worrying a bit about esoteric side cases concerning people's personality and change over time. And we're fortunate in the Western world that we tend to have very good paper trails as to people's identities. From the point that you were born, you're issued with a birth certificate, and then the government and other institutions handily keep track of who you are over time. And so you build up a body of documentation that follows you around in life and gives you your identity. Now, in, for example, Finland, we've basically farmed out the responsibility of identity to the banks. Everybody in Finland is entitled to a personal bank account, and with banks these days you have a code app and you have your identity tied to your banking account. And this is actually even used if you go to a government website. You use your banking codes in order to log on to the tax authorities or to the health authorities in order to identify yourself and have access to your data. So that's identity for people, but of course organizations have identities too. A university has an identity, or a company, and they also have bank accounts, but of course there's going to be individual people within the organization that actually use the identity of the organization they represent it effectively. So when you're looking at transactions between people and organizations, you're in a situation where both sides have to identify themselves. And then people are going to start making what are called claims about their identity. You may, for example, need to prove to the police that you are indeed licensed to drive a car when they stop you on the road, and you do that with a driving license, which at the moment is a plastic card in your wallet. Although, with the way that computer systems are going, those are probably going to disappear over time. The police can just check that you really are entitled to drive a car on their own database. However, what we're seeing over time is that there are just more and more systems and more databases out there, and they do not interact particularly well. Sometimes that's beneficial if you, for example, want to keep your medical data separate from your legal history and your tax affairs. However, it does make it difficult sometimes to find the right stuff. So moving on from systems that are used for identity, I want to look in particular at the concept of accreditations or credentials. So a classic example here is a university degree. You go to a university, you study for 3 years, you pass the exams, and the university awards you a degree. And historically, the way that you then prove that you have a degree is through a piece of paper. I have one in a filing cabinet somewhere that proves that I completed a bachelor's degree at Cambridge University. If I need to prove to somebody that I really do have that degree, I have to fish out that piece of paper and show it to them, and they have to be convinced that it's the genuine article. And to be honest, it was a bit disappointing when I got the paper. It wasn't nearly as fancy as I had hoped for. My father's PhD certificate from the University of Leoben was printed on this fantastic piece of vellum with all sorts of seals and gold and stuff like that on it. My degree certificate looked like something you could just run off on a laser printer in a couple of minutes. So if somebody really wanted to know that I actually have the degree that I claim I have, they would need to get in touch with the administrations department of Cambridge University, and that university would want evidence from them that I am willing to let them know that I actually gave permission for them to look up this information. So there is kind of a problem when it comes to these kind of credentials, but they are extremely important. For example, if you're going to get on an aeroplane, you want to know that the person who's flying it has actually got a pilot's license and has actually gone through all the required tests and all the required learning in order to fly the plane safely. And again, you have this issue then of credentials. How do you verify that somebody actually has a license to fly a plane, or to perform a surgical operation, or handle the accounts of your company? It gets tricky. But we seem to, as a society, have managed so far at a reasonable level, but there of course is always the opportunity for improvement. Now, when you look at the way that credentials are moving, in the old days you did your apprenticeship and you studied for 5 or 6 or 10 years in order to become competent at your profession, and then you practiced that profession for the rest of your life. That's not the way that society works anymore, and as a result we've seen the emergence of micro-credentials, evidence that you have done a one-day health and safety training course, for example, or that you've spent 4 days looking at a particular aspect in computer programming. So this makes the problem a lot more difficult. Now you've not got just a single degree certificate that you can keep in your filing cabinet and fish out when it's needed. Now you have, maybe over your lifetime, hundreds of little pieces of paper saying that you've done this and that and the other. So how to keep track of all these things? Well, this is where maybe blockchain can come in and help, because the problems I've described here start to tick various boxes that set off alerts that blockchain may be suitable. So if you look back to the origins of blockchain, initially it was about sorting out what are effectively financial transactions. And for a financial transaction, you have a concept of ownership. Somebody has something, and you have the concept of a transferal or a transaction. The owner of that something transfers it to somebody else. And the first blockchain, Bitcoin, does this through Bitcoin addresses and asymmetric key cryptography. So it's using digital signatures in order to provide the authority for somebody to undertake an action. And you can transfer this across to credentials. Instead of the transaction being about transferring a number of units of a digital representation of a currency from person A to person B, it's about transferring information about one person to another person. And there is in fact a third party here, which is the issue of the credentials. So it's a little bit more complex than a financial transaction, but in the engineering terms, not that much harder. So this ties in also with the notarization problem, which is that credentials come with a timestamp. They may have a lifespan. For example, you have to repeat certain kinds of training, such as health and safety, or have your driving license reissued if you reach a certain age. So it is useful, if you're going to use a database, to store these credentials, that you know exactly when they were issued, who they were issued by, and who they were issued to. And a second issue, which again blockchain starts to look useful for, is the concept of what is known as self-sovereign identity. The idea that individuals can have some kind of control and ownership over their identity. Now, we're seeing that the way that our institutions handle our data leaves a bit to be desired. There are companies out there that treat people basically as commodities and try to maximize their profits through the use of individuals' data. And there is a fight against this going on, the GDPR regulations of the EU being an example of that. So slowly, people are starting to come around to the idea that maybe just allowing everybody to have access to your data or giving it away for free is not a good thing. And the solution to that is to give control and ownership back to the individuals whose data that actually is. that really is the sort of cornerstone of self-sovereign identity. And I have to say here, I'm not particularly keen on the term self-sovereign, because you as an individual may have the data associated with you, but that data of course is coming from lots of different other institutions. It's not like you can magic up your own birth certificate or your own driving license. You have to have institutions that have the authority to issue these things, otherwise nobody can tell whether they are meaningful or not. So back to this notarization problem. Well, the blockchain solves that very nicely, because you have an open public system, hopefully. That means that anybody can go in and audit that the system hasn't been changed. Blockchains have this consensus building system whereby data is only added if it adheres to the rules. And because they use a hash-linked list and some kind of proof of work or other consensus system, they effectively produce an immutable append-only database. So these are all very useful for notarization services, and of course there's the identity thing again, that you can actually tie the data that is being put on to a particular entity. However, it can be done in an anonymous or pseudo-anonymous way, and in a way whereby people can choose whether they reveal certain things about themselves or not. So very nice for this idea of moving forward in enabling people's personal privacy. So, as I said, a public open blockchain allows society in general to be witnesses. If you have a permissioned blockchain, then you need to have a number of different parties in order to provide that same level of witnessing. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you might as well be running a traditional database. Now, the other advantage of blockchains is that they can leverage the network effect in order to grow. If you make them available to whoever's interested in using them, as they get more and more use, the value of them increases. So, for example, in Europe, there is the EBSI, the European Blockchain Standards Initiative, and they're looking to provide precisely this kind of thing, a sort of multifunctional blockchain that can provide exactly the kind of services that I am describing. And the hope there is that institutions can join and start using it at the time that it feels fit for them. And as more people join, the idea is that it becomes more popular, and therefore more people will be interested in actually engaging with it, which is precisely what we've seen with blockchains such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. Initially, very few users, mainly hobbyists, just exploring the system, growing up into fully fledged financial systems with thousands and hundreds of thousands of users. So I believe that the intent is the same for this kind of notarization and credentials aspect of blockchain in the EBSI. So of course there are going to be some problems, and I have a couple of them jotted down here. One of them is standards. If you have an open public blockchain and it has a specific purpose, for example, providing financial transactions with units of digital currency represented on it, you can define some pretty clear standard data formats and protocols that you're going to adhere to. If you're trying to put something a bit more amorphous and nebulous, such as a general credential, it gets a bit trickier, because different industries and different organizations will have different data fields that they are interested in. But I don't see these problems as insurmountable, and it is a combination of keeping the system flexible and yet at the same time ensuring that it is standardized enough that what ends up on the blockchain makes sense. And one of the possible solutions to this is smart contracts, because they allow for a much more flexible encoding of things such as data and data transactions, whilst not locking you down to specific protocols. And yet at the same time, the metastructure, the programming structure, is very clearly defined. So and then the second issue here really is that of the authenticity of the credential issuing institution. How can you really be sure that when you go to such a blockchain and you check that the university or XYZ has issued a diploma that took 1 week to a particular person, how can you be sure that it really is the university? And again, the quick solution I can see here is that the university effectively publishes its public administration office key on their website, and the idea there is that if it's www.thisuniversity.com or .ac.uk, or yeah, it won't be .com because universities haven't quite yet become fully fledged corporate entities, but you know, they will own a website. They will have a presence on that gives you a sense that they are really a legitimate institution. You go there and you find their public key. Now you can go and look up whether the credential that someone is claiming to have from that institution was actually signed with the private key corresponding to that public key. And of course, there are a whole bunch of other issues that will come into play, mainly to do with public key infrastructure stuff. Not all of these have been solved entirely satisfactorily, but I think we're making progress in that area. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up now because I've been going for nearly 16 minutes. But hopefully this quick overview of credentials, micro-credentials, claims about identity, and how blockchain may have a significant part to play in this whole space. I hope it's been useful for you, and I will see you all in the next video soon. Bye for now.